Hello and welcome to The Autistic Me. I am Christopher Scott Wyatt, speaking as The Autistic Me, and once again I'm being joined by Daniel Sansing. Daniel is a college instructor who currently teaches college success and you said a college reading course?
Reading and writing course, yes, sir.
The reason that I think people enjoy our conversations is that we are both autistic adults, we are parents, and we are educators. So we cover sort of the trifecta there of topics that parents want to hear about: education, parenthood, and career. Right now, with the COVID-19 situation of the pandemic, we are now seeing even greater challenges for autistic students in higher education. And because you work with student success strategies, maybe we can talk about how to help this population that already finds the university setting a challenge. How are we able to adapt and meet their needs in this very stressful new situation?
One of the things that I have seen with students who are neurodiverse is that frequently there's some anxiety component, and I think it's harder for me and for other instructors to reduce that anxiety, whether it's a quick question after class or maybe just a little appointment after class or whatever it is that we can do face-to-face. Even though people with autism are not supposed to be good at nonverbal communication, there does seem to be some things that those face-to-face meetings can really help a student feel better about whatever it is they're working on. And I think it's a big challenge to do video conferencing or however else you're meeting with students and to reduce that anxiety that they're necessarily going to feel just because of the situation we're in.
As autistic individuals ourselves, I know that we sometimes have the students seek us out, take our courses, seek some mentoring from us during office hours. How has the pandemic situation altered that dynamic where we tend to be active mentors, and right now that is more difficult than in a normal situation?
I think that there's always a chance that students are lost along the path in college, and that's true of neurotypical and neurodiverse students. But without some connection, I think most people, if they connect, are going to perform better in whatever the environment is that they're working under. And with an academic environment, if you don't connect to the work and connect to the people who you are working with, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get through it. It's going to be a lot more difficult to be motivated. And it's going to be a lot more difficult to keep the focus that you need to get through difficult classes. So I think that's a real challenge for students right now.
So you teach this college success course, which is, as you put it, psychology-based, and it's about sort of getting out of your way and the things that we do that create failure. So could you explain how a course like that helps all students, but in particular might help those with neurodiverse challenges as they enter a university setting?
Probably the biggest thing that I would say for neurodiverse students, for whatever reason, they have a lot of negative self-talk. One of the things that's part of this curriculum, it's called Uncourse. It's a national curriculum used at colleges and other programs across the country. But is that it does address things like negative self-talk. It describes like an inner guide who would be like your positive inner voice, or the inner critic or inner defender who is either saying it's somebody else's fault in case of the inner defender, or the inner critic that is just beating on you all the time. And I feel like especially students who have had challenging backgrounds, who maybe had childhood trauma, who have PTSD from serving in the military, who have other neurodiversity, anxiety, depression, autism spectrum disorders, all of those students tend to have more of that negative self-talk. And it's really tough to do the difficult work at a college or university if you've always got your own voice in your head telling you you can't do it. So having an awareness just of that process, I think, is helpful to all students, but maybe especially some of the neurodiverse ones.
And this program that you are implementing involved training nationally. So could you explain what the foundation is of this approach?
I feel like this could be a lot better done by Skip Downing. He's the one that designed it, but he was a English professor, and he actually sort of had a midlife crisis. I'm not going to tell his story, but he went back to college and got a master's degree in psychology. And then he realized that what it did for him, that same approach could be helpful to students who are coming into college, because human beings have some kind of baggage, whatever we have, whether it's from neurodiversity or from family issues or from, whatever else it is that we've experienced. Those kinds of things can get in your way. And so it focuses on a lot of soft skills, emotional intelligence, things like accepting personal responsibility, self-management, like all of the time management things that a traditional study skills type class would teach. It has that, as well as all the psychology that goes with it. So, I've had students do things like create a personal affirmation as a little art project and then post it in their dorm room or on their refrigerator where they'll see it every day, where it's just a little positive. I am a caring person who will work hard to finish my degree to help, animals through veterinary technology. I mean, it's just a little statement like that reminds them that they can be positive, and that learning is a process, and a lot of the process is not always pleasant. But if you can stay with the process, you're going to be a lot happier at the end. So it's just sort of a program that helps people focus on what's good about them, what they do well, and sort of ignore the negative stuff that we all have from time to time.
The students that are neurodiverse, as you mentioned, have endured a lot of negative self-talk and also a lot of negative input. In the K-12 system, many were told they were lazy, unfocused. The failures that they were experiencing with executive function were personal failures of the worst kind. So how do you, especially now with the lack of face-to-face or distanced face-to-face, how do you undo that 12 years of negativity that someone might be bringing into the university setting? Well,
you're not going to do it in a semester or a term, however long your course is. But usually, if you obtain some self-awareness, like if the student becomes aware that maybe their habits are tending to push them into negative personal relationships, or if they understand that their habit of always deflecting responsibility and putting it on somebody else is going to keep them from ultimately being responsible for what they can take control of and be successful. So it's really challenging to do in a semester, and I even move around some of the chapters so that we focus on some things earlier that I think are really important for our population of students. But if they get to that aha moment where they say, hey, I'm just a regular person like everybody else. I don't have to beat myself up anymore, and I can do the college degree thing. When they get to that point, then they can keep working, I think we're all working our whole lives, at least in my experience. None of us are really finished. So it helps get them on that path, I guess.
When I talk to students, I reference my own struggles with courses and instructors, as well as some of the social situations. In particular, I have never performed well in group work, which I think is a fairly standard issue, negotiating the social dynamics of groups. And now with online, that's become even more difficult for me as an instructor to notice what is or isn't working, what connections are or are not being made. So when you're mentoring students with neurodiversity, how can you help them negotiate the obstacles that are just natural that are now being magnified?
Frequently I found that neurodiverse students have some kind of perception issue, like their perception of themselves and of the situation and of how things are really going is a little off. And that's true of neurotypical students sometimes too, but I think because neurodiverse students, especially those on the autism spectrum, have gotten a lot of negative feedback their whole lives from other people. Like they have this feeling that people don't like them, but they don't really know why. They don't really get why they're rubbing people the wrong way. And I know in my own self, for instance, I try to be aware of some of the things that I do that are different or unusual. For example, if there's a mistake made in a graduate course, I really, I'm sitting on my hands not to immediately say something or type something in chat to correct it, which I try to keep that to a minimum because I don't want to annoy people. But sometimes the students are not aware of things they're doing in class, and we have to have a talk about that. For example, sometimes they want to answer every question, which is awesome. I'm so glad they're engaged. I'm so glad that they're participating. But other students begin to get a little frustrated if they're not part of the conversation as well. So sometimes as an instructor, I have to have those kind of conversations to help students be aware of things, because I know that I lack self-awareness that I really wish I had at times. And I know that they're probably in a different place, being young people just coming to college. So developing self-awareness is important for us all, but perhaps in the case of neurodiverse students, maybe even more important, and probably something I would, if I was going to develop my own program, I would probably help them do.
Right now, the dominant problem I'm encountering with students on the spectrum is missed deadlines. And I know that's occurring for all students. This move to hybrids and online and distance face-to-face, it's very difficult for them to keep the schedule of turning in drafts, turning in homework, participating in online or virtual discussions. So are you seeing difficulty managing time among your students? And have you come up with any advice for them in managing their time, especially, as I said, when so much of it is online and they're not always checking their phone or always checking the learning management system for deadlines? So how are you addressing that time management aspect of success?
So in regards to neurodiverse students, I'd actually say that I've seen kind of both ends of the spectrum. Like either the student is hyper aware and hyper focused and emailing me 3, 4, 5 times a week and always hitting their deadlines, or they're going to tend to drift. They're going to tend to struggle. And the same thing that I would tell a neurotypical student is to create a study schedule. I think of it like exercise, and I tell them if you can do it every day, go ahead and study for 2 to 3 hours a day. Make it focused. Give your phone to a friend or family member, so if there's an emergency, they can let you know, but otherwise try to remove distractions. But create a specific study schedule, so you study 2 hours on Monday, let's say from 2 to 4 p.m., and then on Tuesday you study from 5 to 7 p.m., and you create that for each day of the week, and you have that schedule. And even read ahead. I always tell students to read ahead if you can. Reading is one thing that you can do. If you know that reading's coming up, you can go ahead and do that reading so that you can focus on studying for a test or some other big project. So the study schedule to me is something that everybody is going to benefit from. I think it's all different. I really encourage students to find what works for them, whether it's an online calendar or a handheld, the old bound daily planners that people use so frequently 20, 30 years ago. But whatever it is, find what works for you, but do have a schedule, because you'll be more successful and less stressed if you're working a little bit each day. If you try to do it in 8 hours on Sunday, you're not going to be as effective.
You mentioned something that I've received complaints about from other instructors, which is the hypervigilant student on the spectrum who is emailing, texting. Last night I had messages almost all the way until midnight. So there's a difficulty with the students' hypervigilance about missing deadlines and meeting the requirements. And this can cause as much conflict with an instructor as missing the deadlines.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of students or a lot of instructors who have had less experience with neurodiverse students, they're going to tend to get frustrated. And the simple fact of the matter is, this is something I was looking at for a literature review that I'm doing for a graduate course, but a lot of the students who come to college are not identifying themselves as neurodiverse in any way. They're not using accessibility resources. So it's a hidden issue in so many cases. Frequently, instructors are better if they do get some communication from accessibility resources, and they're working with that student from the beginning of the term. But I've told instructors, it may take a little bit of extra time, but I think that that's a reasonable accommodation for students. And of course, you have to have a balance. Sometimes you have to communicate with the students and let them know, okay, so, and you can even give specific instructions. You can say, okay, so you can email me on Tuesday and Friday, unless it's an emergency, right? But I really get that, because even as a PhD student right now, I realized I was emailing my advisor more than I was comfortable with. Like, I realized that was a lot of emails, and I know she's really busy working on research and all the work that she does. So we're actually meeting once a month now to video conference, and I'm keeping a journal. And then I'll bring up things at our meetings, and if it's anything in between, I can still email. But it did cut down on the amounts of emails, so there's probably ways to negotiate that between instructor and students. But I would just encourage instructors that if you can reduce the neurodiverse students' anxiety in any way, that they're probably gonna feel more comfortable, especially if you get that started early in the term, and they're gonna need to email you less later in the term. So it's probably something where you invest early and you benefit from it later in the term.
I do like the idea of keeping a journal or a list of questions and then sending those as a unit to the instructor. I'm trying that with several of my students who are sending very frequent direct messages in our Slack channel or on Blackboard, which is our learning management platform. And I found that telling them to just make a list and then at the end of the day, send that list. Otherwise, I was encountering an issue where they were sending out emails or messages every hour. And I think that tends to overwhelm other instructors, and they don't know how to respond to that. I think it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the traditional student is not going to do that. The traditional student is going to struggle and, try to paddle in deep water themselves and not email really when they should have. Whereas a neurotypical student might be emailing you once a day. I had a student who pretty much, I knew that we were going to spend 10 or 15 minutes talking after each class. I didn't have a class after that at the time, and I was happy to do that. But I suspect it's much more difficult for these students when they can't have access to the instructor that they would have in a face-to-face class. They may not benefit from video conferencing in the same way. So it's going to be more difficult, but I like the idea, like you said, of collecting things and maybe sending a couple of emails a week. I have found that with neurotypical students, sometimes I have to be a little bit more specific. Like I may even say which days, almost like an appointment. Email me on Tuesday, email me on Friday, because otherwise, if there's not a structure, sometimes they're going to struggle and maybe not keep to whatever the plan was.
When we look at the courses that you and I teach, which are often general electives, they're required, everyone has to take them, and they become gatekeeper courses. We are discouraged from offering extensions or incompletes because our courses sort of mark someone's progress at the university or college where they can get to move on. And yet I have found myself giving more extensions and more leeway over the last 6 months. I would like to think that every instructor understands that there are stresses and situations that are unique to all of the students right now, not just the neurodiverse, the neurotypical, the single parents, whatever. There are so many things happening right now that make it extra difficult. And yet, I also do understand that we have to get these students graded and moved on. How do you explain to the students that, yes, you can get an extension or two, but you have to take some extra responsibility right now because, unfortunately, our courses do determine whether or not you get to move on?
Well, that's one thing I like about teaching with portfolio is that we can look at the holistic body of a student's work. We can take into account reflections in addition to, those are usually done weekly in my classes. We can take that into account in addition to the longer writing projects that they have. But I think assessment will be something that needs to be flexible. In terms of neurodiverse students, in the coming years, we have a cohort of neurodiverse students that's coming to colleges in the last few years. We've really had an increase of the students who we're working with, whether they identify or not, and whether they use accessibility resources or not. But I believe in teaching individual students. I believe in tailored instruction, and assessment needs to have some flexibility to it, because a student can demonstrate an ability to write and to engage in the way that's needed for college without having the perfect portfolio with all 500 to 1,000 word essays. Like we can look at those things in different ways. And of course, with a portfolio committee like we have those conversations at the end of a class. And I would say, fortunately, the other instructors that teach the integrated reading and writing class that I have right now, they both have experience and knowledge and sympathy for neurodiverse students. If we were not in that situation, I think it would be a lot more difficult. But I would say we need to look at assessment at colleges and the gatekeeping aspect of these courses, because if that's the one thing that's keeping them from becoming somebody who works in IT for a company, then we need to take a look at our assessment and see if we are being a bit too narrow in what we accept.
I have started to question the courses that are those gatekeepers. I understand that we have taught public speaking and college composition for literally hundreds of years. There are some wonderful books on the history of writing instruction and the history of speech instruction. But I'm wondering if things have changed and we need to update those as we have moved to Zoom meetings and email and some other things where the traditional documents and the traditional speeches have changed. But universities are fairly conservative. They sort of stick with what they've always done. So how do you advocate for changing and revising grading, whether it's composition or public speaking or anything, in the way that you have successfully moved as an institution to portfolios? I think that it would be wonderful to see more institutions do that. So how do we advocate for changing our curriculum and assessment in ways that meet the changing needs of our students and our society?
Well, one of the things that I certainly think is beneficial to argue for is writing in the disciplines. If you're an IT major, maybe you have a writing class for that major. I can see doing those kind of things that would be helpful. But I don't necessarily see that happening nationwide. I don't think that's going to happen everywhere, and it might not be appropriate for every college. I mean, a very small college may have different needs and different abilities to support students than a college of 30, 40,000. It's probably going to come down to better training and better curriculum development with the needs of neurodiverse students in mind. And for that, we have to listen to instructors with the experience and to the students themselves and really better negotiate how we do some of these things. But just in a general conversation, I would probably say assessment is broken in so many ways in so many different disciplines. Other people would probably not be happy with me for that. But I do see that's one of the places that we can make the biggest impact for neurodiverse students is by being more open and adapting in the way that we assess students' work to welcome difference, which we don't always do. We welcome normality. I mean, we don't cater to outliers. We cater to the average student who can, do the social stuff and do the work. And that's not going to be fair if we're really looking for justice for students with differences. Then we're going to have to be more open in our assessment.
You are currently working towards a doctorate degree.
Yes.
And you are interested as a self-advocate, as a parent, as an educator in the needs of neurodiverse students.
Yes.
And could you explain why you believe that we need more research as it relates to instruction? Because so often they want autism research or neurodiversity research in psychology or in social work. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of research in the area of instruction and pedagogy. So what motivated you to pursue that, and how are you shaping that for future research?
Well, I have children who are neurodiverse. I think that's a big part of it. Our youngest is 14, and she's going to be going to college in a few years. So I think I have that in mind. I also have in mind all the neurodiverse students I've been working with for, I guess I started teaching classes in 2010 at the community college, or it's a community college branch of a university. I think about the students and what they need and how those courses can keep them from doing something that they'd really love to do and something that they would be good at. So from the standpoint that I'm in, and there has been some great work done already, but I'm especially looking at reading and writing classes in college and how those impact the neurodiverse students who are taking those classes and ways that we can better support them. Just to give an example, I've started including a script of numbered steps for every writing prompt that I write. All the major projects that I have, I include all of the information that I normally would, and like the when, and like when it's due, audience, all those kinds of things. But I also include a script that they can just follow as sort of a checklist to work through all those steps, because that seems to be helpful for some students. What I found is that it also helps the neurotypical students as well, in a lot of cases. So it's probably good instructional practice anyway, and I'm sure, CS, that you're familiar with this from like universal design. A lot of those things we have found, not only do they benefit people with accessibility issues, but they also benefit just the neurotypical students as well. So it's good practice anyway. And if we can start to see those things in that light, I think that's going to be helpful for all students, especially the neurodiverse students.
If we take a look at the legal mandates and the structural organization of K-12, they've had to deal with autism as an identified special need now for several years. I think universities have been somewhat spared that direct responsibility for students on the spectrum. Now, thankfully, it is included in ADA, and there's an increasing awareness of autistic students and neurodiversity in general at our universities. But most of the research was done K-12, and I understand that. In fact, there was even sort of a hesitancy to assume that autistic students were going into our colleges and universities. I think until the early 2000s, that was just not even a thought. I think only now are they starting to say, wow, we have a lot of students who are neurodiverse, learning disabilities, other cognitive challenges. So it seems that awareness is increasing, but we are far behind where some of the K-12 research and instruction has been.
Well, I would say yes and no. A lot of those things are very specific to school district. And this is why parents of children with autism frequently do shopping for districts that are more open and meet the needs of neurodiverse students. There are still a lot of districts getting in trouble for not meeting the federal mandates. They push students away and their parents away from the IEP and push them into a 504 when that's really not the appropriate choice. Sometimes they don't even want to do a 504 for students, especially high-performing students. They don't want to do the whole process. So, students have to advocate for themselves when they're high school age, and younger than that, the parents have to do a lot of advocacy. But unfortunately, across the country, I would say that it's kind of hit or miss on the help that you're going to get with your student of neurodiverse situation. So I do think that a lot of the research has been helpful. And unfortunately, and this is one of the issues that I think a lot of these college age neurodiverse students face, is there are a lot of people now who diagnose and who treat and who have consultations, regularly with neurodiverse students in the K through 12 adolescence age. There's nobody for adults. So there's no real place to transition to. That's going to be a definite need in the coming years, are people who work with high school and college age and older folks with neurodiversity, because there's just not a lot of support there.
You're right. In terms of the research being implemented, we may have the research and we may have the knowledge, but you're right. A lot of the K-12s don't implement it, and they certainly don't train staff and faculty as well as they might be able to.
Yeah, and parents have to become familiar with the ADA, and that's something that I've shared with, and my wife shares with, and you have to know the law to really be able to get the services that you need. And a lot of people don't know what their student has the right to, and just knowing that can be helpful. But fortunately, I think there are more people supporting that. There are more law offices who take on those cases, and that's making a difference in a lot of places. But even though there's been a lot of great research done at children's hospitals and at some communities across the country, I would say that in a lot of communities, they're 20 to 30 years behind in how they help students with difference.
My assumption is, based on experiences, that universities are even further behind. When we have offered brown bag lunches, seminars, training, it has been very difficult at the schools and universities where I have taught to get people to attend. Unfortunately, there is an assumption that, okay, there are a few neurodiverse students on campus and they're kind of quirky, but they're over in the STEM fields. We don't really have to worry about them. And then what happens is those students are actually everywhere, and they're taking our writing courses and our speech courses. And we really can't take the attitude that they're somewhere else. They're not our problem, because they're going through our classes and they're struggling, particularly in our classes. I have noticed all too often that writing and speech become, as I've said, the gatekeepers, where these wonderful students who have other abilities just come crashing down and sometimes leave the university because these courses require a different mindset. Sometimes it's exacerbated when the instructor isn't willing to be flexible. I'm thinking right now of composition courses that take a heavy literature bent, or a public speaking class that takes a heavy persuasive bent. And so what happens is the neurodiverse student isn't really able to exhibit what the instructor thinks is acceptable work, because that's just not how that student's mind functions and processes information. I've had neurodiverse students tell me they were described as immature, that they were described as not having deep thought. From the perspective of the instructor, that was true, but from a bigger perspective, it's just that they're looking at the world through a different lens, through a different set of filters.
I think that it's difficult for faculty who really have not had any experience with difference in that way to even know what they're experiencing. Like, I look back at interactions I had when I was an undergrad, and I'll think, man, my professors must have thought I was odd. But fortunately, some of them sort of adopted me and mentored me, and I was able to excel. But that's not the case for all students. And one of the biggest challenges for colleges and universities is that so many students, and I've met students who do this, they want to just leave everything behind, their IEP, whatever they were. They come to college. And part of it, honestly, is because they want to date and they want to have choices. They want to date if it's somebody who's neurotypical or somebody who's neurodiverse. They want to have the same thing that everybody else has. But unfortunately, that sort of removes their self-advocacy. I really encourage students, especially if they are struggling, to get in touch with accessibility resources and go ahead and get some kind of something on file. Even if you don't want to ask for accommodations, go ahead and have it on file in case something comes up, in case you do struggle, in case you come upon a situation that's going to make everything more difficult. It's just... college is hard anyway, and I would say that a lot of these students experience more anxiety and depression in college because of all the things they're having to negotiate, because they're socially awkward, plus maybe they're really good at doing school, but then everybody, thinks they're teacher's pet or thinks they're, showing off in class because of the difference. And I think I think it's great that they have a choice not to disclose, but at the same time, everybody will see them as different and react perhaps negatively. So, and I think faculty do that just as much as anybody. The faculty who will be understanding and who will be more open, if they know, then they have a chance to do that. But if they just have no idea what's different about that student, then even the faculty who care and will change their approach don't really know that they should be doing that. So yeah, I get what you're saying about campus, and I hate it for students when they feel outsiders, when they feel left out. But we have not created campus communities yet that are perfectly accepting. Even if we try, we've still got a ways to go.
With the situation occurring right now, several of my students on the spectrum have decided to transition to all online when it is available instead of the hybrid format. They're finding some success with that because they're shielded from the social interactions that occur face-to-face. That's not true for everyone, certainly, but it is true for some students that the online has given them a feeling of equality and a feeling that they're not as obvious. They're not standing out as much within the classroom because now they're online with everyone else, so nobody sees them rocking or tapping or doodling or looking off into space. Now they're just another name on the screen or a letter in the Zoom box. And so some of them have told me that this approach, by choosing the online option, they feel more equal to the other students in the class. How would you respond to those students who are finding that online is actually empowering?
I think that that's terrific for the students it's working for. Any way that we can create some equality is good, and if they're experiencing that way, I think that's terrific. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to be ideal for all the students. But I know myself in my graduate classes I'm taking right now, I love it being online. I pretty much only turn on my mic and my video when I'm in a breakout group. I tend not to ever have it on in the big class of 35. I'm just my name up there on the Zoom screen. I'm more likely to maybe type a question or a comment in the chat than I would be to say something to the large group of 35, which I feel very different in terms of how I engage in a class that I'm taking versus in a class that I'm teaching, where I'm performing as the instructor. I do wonder, I know you said you teach the communication courses. I guess if a speech is scripted in a way, and then the student sort of performs that online, I guess that would work well. and they might not have some of the same reactions from the other students that you would see in a traditional classroom. There's not going to be a snicker or something like that generally, because those students probably have their mics off. So there are a lot of things that it probably feels very liberating for some students. Certainly, I can see that. But my concern would be for the students in their engagement with instructors. But as long as they're getting enough of that, I think online could be terrific. And we should probably offer more online for students to have choices.
I'm definitely a proponent of more online when the situation is optimal. Obviously, everyone rushing online and just throwing our courses online in March was not optimal. I think when online is done well and based on best practices, online can be effective, depending on a lot of other circumstances, certainly. But I think we need to understand that online does have a rich set of research literature behind it and that it can be done well. At the same time, I worry about undergraduates, since I mainly work with first and second year students right now. There is a social aspect to college, and it prepares them for life beyond the university, and our jobs, our interactions with other people will likely, I hope, be face-to-face and ideally without so many masks and social distancing. So in some ways, I've always looked at my classroom as so much more than just a speech class or a writing class or a business class, whatever it is I was teaching. It is also preparation for social skills in life and in the workplace. And now that's not happening for every student. So I'm torn, because as an autistic individual, I really do struggle, and my shortcomings are in the area of face-to-face interpersonal communication. I know I love being online and talking like this, but this is not how we are right now via a computer connection. Is not how most of life is conducted. So I'm trying to balance this in my mind as an autistic individual. I know that those students with neurodiversity need to build up some confidence and work through some of that face-to-face, and we aren't getting it right now. And that might be a detriment. I'm not sure.
We need to have opportunities. I think about some of my students that were on campus, and I would, see them and talk to them on campus. But if they try to sit in the commons with a group of people, I saw some get teased, and they even shared this with me that, somebody was teasing them because they liked a person or whatever. And those kind of very negative experiences, I don't think we'd miss at all. But I do think it's important for people to have opportunities. So if we are going to have these online classes, then would it be great if we had some kind of interactivity that we could create between neurotypical and neurodiverse students, where they worked in a group, or where they accomplished some task? Or, I'm working with a group right now trying to get a group on campus started called Peer Connect that basically is going to connect alumni. I have former students who wanted to help out current students, and so they have been instrumental in getting this started. But the alumni, current students, and also resources on campus, so we could practice things like interviewing. I mean, this is something that I think about. I think about my interviews and how they probably have not gone well. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have for employment, is interviewing in a way where we make people comfortable and aren't intimidating. That's one of the comments that I've gotten back after interviews, is that I'm intimidating, and I don't mean to be. I don't know how to be different, but those kind of things, if we can keep working on that, I think that would be good. But I see negative experiences, and I know I had my own set of negative experiences in sort of unmitigated, informal human communications, where we just go and try to chat. I'm not really good at chatting. I don't really see what's the point. I want to talk about a thing, or a topic or something that's interesting. But just I think that we probably can create opportunities that way, but it's going to be more of a challenge, and we'll have to spend some time and thought getting it right.
I would like to see more hybrid online options for students with special needs. At the same time, I would stress to parents and individuals with special needs that there is a value to that face-to-face traditional experience. And I think there has to be a balance. I think for myself, taking some classes online and some on campus allowed me time to recover from the face-to-face interactions. So, you have a class in a classroom at the university and the graduate school and then have one online. You could sort of recharge a little easier by having that break from the face-to-face. But I don't know that one or the other is ideal. I think there's that, as you said, we need that opportunity to have both and maybe to ease ourselves into one or the other. I think choice is key. And I think our experiences with the COVID-19 online learning and hybrid learning is that it can be done and we can improve it, but I still don't know that I want to see everything moved online either.
Absolutely. And I didn't mention that I really had a crash course in social interaction when I was actually still, I guess, a junior or senior in college, and I got a job at a newspaper because I needed to have a job and pay off some bills. And I worked there for 5 years. And being a newspaper reporter and then doing editing and the other things, then page design and the things that I did there at the newspaper really forced me into a very social role. So it was almost like, if a psychologist was going to put somebody with autism spectrum disorder in an intensive program, sink or swim, that's what I did. And I know what you're talking about with the communication classes and how those can be important for students to really be able to develop the soft skills, and soft skills are needed. Soft skills are vital. It's something I talk about with the student success courses. If you don't have a venue and like a space to develop those kind of things, you're at a significant disadvantage for employment. It's going to be tricky, but even if we're holding a lot of online courses, maybe we should offer either a virtual space for discussions or let students do those kind of things on campus, even if they're mainly taking their classes online. We have to create spaces that help. But we had our campus actually very forward thinking in that it had a social interaction group that was really being offered for neurodiverse students. But the neurodiverse students didn't go, and I think partly because they felt segregated. It was just neurodiverse students meeting with a psychologist. They really want to interact with neurotypical students as well, and I think they also know, sort of intuitively, that's who I need to interact with so I can get better at it. I don't just need to interact with people who are like me. I need to interact with people who are different than me. I think those are the kind of opportunities that we need to create. And I think more neurotypical students are open to those kinds of experiences. And a lot of them have brothers and sisters maybe who are neurodiverse themselves. So maybe we're reaching a point where we can create those things more easily. I hope so.
The autistic self-advocacy community often says, well, other people need to change first. And I understand that, and I certainly sympathize with that notion. But the reality is there are thousands of people I interact with when I go out and go shopping, go buy books, whatever it is, go to the grocery store. Well, I may want and appreciate that idea that other people have to be more accepting of my autistic traits. The reality is, I think, as you said, we have to interact with a much larger community that is diverse in many, many other ways. And we have to learn to adapt to some of those social norms, adapt to some of the expectations of interactions. And I think our courses, whether it's composition or reading and writing or public speaking, I think one reason we keep those at the university is the university assumes these are basic skills we need: the ability to write to each other, the ability to speak to each other. Even though I might agree with some of the autistic advocates that other people need to accept our ways of thinking too, The reality is we want to interact with people who are neurotypical. We want to interact with the general public. We want to have full and rich lives outside of our safe spaces. And that does require that we interact and learn how to interact in a safe space, but we learn how to interact with other people.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I've seen is that on campus, a lot of the neurodiverse students, they want not only to make friends with neurotypical students, but in fact, they want to be able to date. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But they do have the awareness that they can only improve their soft skills and social interaction with neurotypical people by experiencing them more. And while I think that a lot of the programs that we have are terrific, if the students aren't able to engage in the ways that they need, being pulled aside or being separated in some way is really a detriment to those students. So hopefully we can move toward more supports. And these students are coming to college because they want to get a job. They want to have a job just like everybody else. And to interview well and to perform well in a work environment, they're going to need probably extra support on developing some of those things. Like a lot of students, they come to college and they know that they're there to network. They join a fraternity that's got connections into whatever field that they are interested in going into. Some students sort of know that intuitively or have learned that in the culture that they grew up in. But some students, that's always going to be a struggle. It's not fair to just give them skills without giving them the soft skills that are actually going to get them the job and keep them employed.
I have been asked by parents and students if, as they're now seniors in high school thinking about colleges and universities, if they should reconsider or make other plans. I've always been a proponent of two-year colleges and local commuter schools to test whether or not you're ready for that university experience, especially because sometimes with special needs, you need that ability to retreat under stress. So I'm still suggesting even now, and maybe more so now, to consider the two-year and the state universities that are four-year but commuter campuses, that it might be wise right now with the additional stresses to consider those options as really good schools with really great faculty that will let you ease into the university experience. What's your view of that right now with the pandemic and some of the additional stress? Does that increase your likelihood to promote the two-year experience, or have you just always thought that 2 years can be fantastic for everybody without regard to the current situation?
Well, there's a lot to be said for specific programs that are very focused, like a two-year nursing program, or we have a veterinary technology program where students can become basically like veterinary assistants in that program. There's a lot to be said for programs like that for people with difference. I think that we actually have gotten quite a few students into some of those programs, which is interesting. I've even had conversations with the program coordinator over in Vet Tech because she was looking for ways to help support these students, and she wants to learn. She wants to be more supportive and to be able to adapt in ways that are going to help these students. I think there's a lot to be said for that for most families with a neurodiverse child who's going into college to give it a try, to be able to live at home. But a lot of the students do want to live on campus, and I think that's a great opportunity too. Fortunately, and I believe we're doing this down at our main campus at UC, there are residential programs now. If students like that, if they do well in a residential program for neurodiverse and ASD students, I think that's terrific. Obviously, you have to have a college or university that's got the resources and is large enough to be able to offer that kind of thing. But just doing the traditional, I'm going to go, like I had to do, I think, my first 2 years in the dorms at the liberal arts college where I went for my undergrad. There were a lot of things that were difficult, I'd say, about that experience. In retrospect, I might have been better off just taking a scholarship close to home and going to college and commuting. But I also benefited from it. And I think that's the same could be said for some of these students. So it really kind of depends on the family and what's the best fit for them. But I would probably either choose something local where the student could commute and have the home supports, or a residential program specifically for neurodiverse students.
The move to online has revealed that a lot of the instruction at the 2-year and 4-year dedicated teaching colleges is outstanding, and they were actually very well equipped because they already had learning management systems in use. They were well equipped for this transition to online. And some of the elite colleges actually struggled to shift online as effectively. And I think that when I talk to families and students, one of the things I try to stress is that the faculty at a 2-year college is dedicated to teaching. And they're not going to be as distracted with their research work, though some are doing outstanding research, but most of them are teaching full-time. That is what they do. And many of the teaching colleges, again, the emphasis on their tenure track is on teaching. So in many ways, I think that aligns well with the needs of the autistic student who's going to be asking questions and seeking out office hours instead of dealing with a teaching assistant who might be 2 or 3 years older than them and not aware of how to communicate with an autistic or a neurodiverse student. So in some ways, that's why I personally highly recommend the teaching campuses, is I have found that the faculty are just by nature dedicated teachers.
Largely, I think that's true. It kind of depends on the college or university, and just like with K through 12, there's a wide range of what you can experience across the country. But I don't know about Ivy League schools. I don't know what they're doing to support students with difference. I feel like in a lot of cases, there's just the expectation that, well, even if you do have some kind of difference, you're just supposed to get over it and perform at that, whatever that situation is. But I do know that the population of students is increasing, whether or not they're identifying or not on campuses. There are a lot more students that are going to need services, and it's probably going to be close to 10%. It's as low as 2% and as high as 8% or more of students coming to campus now are coming with some kind of neurodiversity that they're going to be dealing with and they're going to need support for. So I think that our campus is great, but I don't know that we're typical. But we've had, faculty trainings where we talk specifically about neurodiversity and autism and students with difference. So a lot of our continuing education is focused on teaching and on supporting students. So I think if that is your focus, whatever your university or college is, then you're going to be better for neurodiverse students just because they're probably going to need a little extra support.
I certainly hope that as we put this pandemic behind us in the future, that we're able to get back to training faculty to deal with the diversity and to embrace more student difference. I'm heartened to see that we're making progress on racial and gender issues. We're making a lot of progress because of social pressure, and I hope that we're able to transition to looking at diversity well beyond. I'd like to think that we're going to embrace all forms of diversity, not just those forms of diversity that have departments on campus. We have Black studies or we have queer studies, but increasingly you're seeing disability studies, but they don't always embrace the hidden disabilities. Disability studies has historically, for good reason, I'm sure, focused on the obvious, the visual, I don't know how to say it, but the disabilities you can't ignore, as where autism is sort of this hidden disability that's difficult to promote and get people engaged with as a faculty.
There seems to be a fairly significant population. This is some of the research that I'm looking into. There's a cross-sectionality between neurodiversity and gender spectrum, gender diversity, that's interesting. So I think that however it's approached, that's going to be something that colleges and universities will have to engage with, because it's here. I mean, it's a fact with the students that we're getting on campus now. So both, I guess, neurology and gender are more fluid than they ever have been before. Hopefully we'll get past check boxes where you just have to check a binary gender, or is there really any such thing as a binary in terms of mental health? I think most of us have moved past that now. Large percentage of the population has dealt with depression or anxiety or something at some point in their lives. So I think these will be interesting conversations and interesting research to come.
I appreciate your time. I always look forward to our discussions here on the Autistic Me podcast. I really like having another educator and parent talk about these things. And right now, it's so important as our universities struggle to adapt and survive during this pandemic that we discuss how that is affecting the experiences of our neurodiverse students.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you having me on and giving me the ability to talk about this, because it's something I care about and something that matters to a lot of people. And, for all the parents out there and folks who are getting ready to have your kids go to college, well, it's a big step, but there are going to be some more supports than there ever were before, thankfully.
I hope it will continue to get better as you begin your research and you work towards your doctorate. And I obviously finished my doctorate and did some research in online education and autism. I think as we build a body of research as self-advocates, hopefully we will reach other faculty and improve the experiences for the next generations of neurodiverse students.
I believe that we're making improvements, and I'm typically a pretty optimistic person, so I like to think that people can improve. I like to believe that anyway.
I'd certainly like to say that the universities are, even if they're far behind where I'd like them to be, and our schools are far behind where I'd like them to be, at least some progress is slow and steady, and you and I can contribute to that progress as researchers, as professors, and as lifelong students.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I appreciate it.
I'm going to be preparing some podcasts on mental health with Daniel and Ben Sorensen. So we're going to have an autistic trio put together so we can talk about mental health and self-care and wellness, because that affects all autistic individuals, and I think it really affects all humans. So Daniel, I look forward to speaking with you again on the roundtable with Ben.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Daniel Sansing for joining us on the Autistic Me podcast. I look forward to our next meeting. Thank you for listening.